Welcome, everybody, to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno, episode 12. Today's guest is a former coach in the CFL of the Calgary Stampeders, Edmonton Eskimos, Montreal Alouettes, former player of the CFL and the Calgary Stampeders, as well as Saskatchewan Roughriders, and a tenure in the NFL. Tom Higgins. Tom, thanks so much for being on. We really appreciate you giving your time today to grace us with your wisdom and all the great stories of the many journeys you've had through football.
My pleasure. I enjoy recounting many stories that we will go over and many fond memories in football altogether.
So to go back to the origins of your college days in the United States, you're a former NC State player and played under Lou Holtz. And now for those who may not know Lou Holtz, very, very famous collegiate football head coach in the NCAA. Now, looking back now from, many years later, what impact did he have on who you became as a player and who you became as a coach, considering the fame of his legacy?
Well, when we were at North Carolina State, he wasn't famous yet. He was working on it. And so I like to think that we helped propel him into his next journey. Where his fame came from is, he had success in Arkansas, Minnesota, but Notre Dame, he won a national championship. And that's where it was pretty exciting. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I had the opportunity, I played all the sports, and I had the opportunity to be drafted, to be recruited in pretty much in the ACC, Atlantic Coast Conference. And when I went down to North Carolina State and Lou Holtz was there, that was his first year, you could understand that something really exciting was going to happen. He could make you believe that you could run through a wall. He just had that way about him. He had a lisp, and you didn't notice it anymore because everything that came out were words of wisdom. And it was an interesting 4 years. It was a very enjoyable 4 years. We were very successful. Peach Bowl twice, Asheville Blue Bonnet Bowl, Liberty Bowl. And that's before they put those other names that went with those bowl games. They didn't have naming on them. But if somebody were to say one of the bigger influences in my professional career or my even just growing up, if I never had the chance to play professionally or just go into coaching, he was one of the mentors. There's a lot of positives that I took out of that experience. And it's what I learned, maybe the one thing, it's really all about people and how you treat people and how you deal with people, because you're not coaching football players, you're coaching people. And we're in the people business. And so that was probably the biggest takeaway.
And for those that now follow his career and the famous games he was in, you mentioned his time with Notre Dame, the national championship there. The famous ESPN documentary since has been released, the 30 for 30 Catholics versus Convicts, the great game against Jimmy Johnson, the Miami Hurricanes. That's years after the fact you had played. And when you reflect on the legacy of that game in and of itself, in the moment that it happened and the recounting tale of that, what does that mean for the legacy that he had established during that time with Notre Dame? And what did that make you feel in terms of, you mentioned the impact he had on you as a mentor? When you look and make that connection, do you feel that he really, like, his fame and you guys propelling him into fame, that really was the start of where it all happened?
Well, first thing that he did is he got himself a good coaching staff, because all the credit and blame should fall on the head coach, and that's what happens. Then he went about and recruited some really good football players that are team-oriented, that, it was more important. The team came first than the individual. And so, again, those things that you learn. It was fun to watch his evolution, because he went to Arkansas, Minnesota, and he's Notre Dame. And when you hear him being interviewed, you're saying, wow, he said that all that many years ago. Nothing really changed all that much. He just got slicker, and he's very, very entertaining if you were ever to listen to him as a public speaker. And so when you watch, there's a great deal of joy. It's almost like watching a family member succeed. It's like watching your child take a step for the first time, that you're so proud and thinking, oh, wow, isn't this great? That's the sensation that you had. And it's interesting how things actually um, you know, come about that Catholics and convicts became a really interesting story, but I'm sure he disliked it because that's not what he wanted to be known for. He didn't want it to be that, no, we're just playing another group of fine young men that happen to be in a different state. And so to be able to label something like that, I don't believe is really fair to actually stick a label on somebody else. But some coaches do that and do it on purpose. That's not what Coach Holtz is about. He's about getting his players prepared, getting them ready to line up, letting them play. And so it was a great deal of pride watching him succeed in all the different universities where he went.
And I can only imagine how much of an impact that it would have had. And like you mentioned, watching a family member succeed and seeing someone who now is very famous and like you said, back in the day, was starting to build his reputation. And it's very interesting you mentioned that, what he was saying in interviews later on when he was with Notre Dame and famous, and then what he said when you were a player, is not much has changed. And I think that speaks to his character. And then that rubs off on the players and the people that he impacted during his coaching career. And so then you took your talents from playing at North Carolina and you went to the Calgary Stampeders in the CFL. Was there a lot of buzz around the Canadian Football League down where you were playing in the US, or was it completely foreign to you at the time?
I knew about the Canadian Football League, Canada. Having been born and raised in the United States, I tell people I'm born an American citizen, and I'm proud to choose to be a Canadian citizen. So I had the best of both worlds and chose to raise our family here in Canada. It's a interesting scenario that the reason that the CFL offered me a better opportunity, but the moment that I told somebody that in the United States, and they're very me-minded, they really don't know. They know Mexico is below them and Canada is above them. And when I told people that I was playing for the Calgary Stampeders, and they said, how close is that to Toronto? So, and some people know a lot about Canada, but for the most part, they don't. And so I would say, well, it's right next to British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, or Saskatchewan. Had no clue. I would then say it's above Montana. And so they'd say, oh, it's close to the Rocky Mountains. It's so I'm going to be playing for the Calgary Stampeders. And they go, do they play? It's a televised. And sometimes you can pick up television games way back then, even back then, that yes, it's televised. And then when you have to tell them a little bit about, yeah, it's only 3 downs to get 10 yards. It's the field is 65 yards across. There's a 55-yard line. The end zones are at that time 25 yards deep. It was an education to tell people that, hey, I'm going to Canada. The one thing my mother said before I left is just don't fall in love with a Canadian woman. And I didn't listen to her. I did. I found my wife here when I started the professional journey. She's born and raised in Calgary. And we got married sometime during this odyssey of playing professional football when I was with the Buffalo Bills. We were married, and then we were with Saskatchewan together. So she had the full gamut of being a player's wife, then a coach's wife, an executive's wife, GM, and assistant GM, and then director of officiating. So she knows football in and out, and so does our family. And so yeah, it was quite a shock to people down in the States. We're going to follow the CFL now. And when somebody does follow the CFL, they start to fall in love with it once they understand the nuances of it. Unlimited motion blows people away. Are you kidding me? How do you cover people? You can do it, and it's done.
Yeah, and especially at the time, then the face of the leagues and the famous players, especially you mentioned, is it televised? And you look at the franchises that were, that stood out the most. You had Edmonton and Montreal during the 70s and during a bit of the 80s. And Calgary was they were in a strange time when you went there compared to now and when you were coaching with them. So what was the first experience like being in Calgary, and what was your transition like moving to a new country and getting accustomed to playing football in a different set of rules?
Well, when you're a football junkie like myself, because I was born in a football family, my dad played professionally. He played at North Carolina. I played at North Carolina State. So for 4 years, we didn't talk to one another. But my dad played for the Chicago Cardinals and Philadelphia Eagles, and then he was a high school football coach in the state of New Jersey. So football's in my blood, and so it really didn't matter. I came on up, and I was going to be a linebacker. And I don't think the equipment manager knew that I was going to be a linebacker because they gave me number 75. But it didn't matter. I'm thinking, rather interesting. Offensive tackles, right, were all of a sudden a different number. And you're going, that's an ineligible. So it only takes you a little while to get caught up to exactly what it is, because it's still, football is the fundamentals: blocking, tackling, throwing, catching, doing all those little things. So that doesn't change. It's just a matter of how quickly can you adapt. Being 1 yard off the ball is a little bit different. But I had a huge, huge advantage. So being a linebacker, I made it. And it was interesting at that time because I didn't know my coach because I was a linebacker. And we had this defensive line coach, and we had a defensive back coach. And we had my coach name was guest coach. And I'm thinking, who is my coach? And this guest coach, it took me a while to figure out he's only here for a short time. At that time, so that's many years ago, you only had two defensive coaches. You had a defensive front coach and you had a defensive back coach. So I'm a linebacker, and I get to do some work with defensive backs, or then I do some work with the defensive line. But what happened is a quick adjustment and then making it. I was blessed because we played a true 4-3 defense. The two defensive tackles played over the guards. And so the first game that I played, and you're going to think, boy, this guy is all full of himself. I had 11 unassisted tackles, and it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with John Helton. He was playing defensive tackle, and if they didn't double team him, they weren't going to get plays off. So all I had to do was just run and make tackles. I didn't have to shed any blocks. And so the adjustment was really enjoyable. And to make it was, again, one of those things, because we had like 15 linebackers, and 9 of them, I believe, were Americans, and we were only going to keep 2. And the rest were Canadians, and we're going, okay. And so also learning about the ratio and how it works was really interesting, but it didn't take long. It's actually, to make the adjustments, not as bad as most people would think. If you are into your craft and your skill, those things take over. The nuances you learn.
So you were with Calgary for a bit of time there, and played just during an era, I guess, when, like you mentioned, they had different number of coaches on defense. So you learned a little bit of everything. And then you went during your odyssey, like you mentioned, to the NFL. And so how many years did you spend in Calgary before you got the opportunity to go down south again? And
well, it was a single year, because then when I went back, this starts the understanding how difficult it is. A professional career, a professional football player is under 4 years. And I didn't realize that. I figured I wanted to play for 10 years. I came back the next year, and there was a coaching change. Jack Goda was the head coach, and all of a sudden philosophies changed and whatnot. So I was cut that year. And so then I went and couldn't get caught on. I went down and worked on a master's at University of Virginia. But then the next year is I had the opportunity to start with the New York Giants. And then, so let me get you really quickly through, so you'll get to feeling and understanding. To be a professional athlete is difficult. But I was with the New York Giants, and I got hurt in the last preseason game. So I didn't make the roster, and I was injured. And the moment that I got healthy, I was let go. So then I coached that year at a high school. The next year, I started with the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns and the Buffalo Bills had a rookie scrimmage against one another. And Cleveland Browns did me a favor. They cut me so Buffalo Bills could pick me up. So I played for Buffalo for a full year. Went back the next year, was cut. And now I'm with Saskatchewan. And I played the last part of the football season. And I actually played against Ron Lancaster in 1976, played for Ron Lancaster, and I actually was Ron Lancaster's boss in Edmonton. So Ron Lancaster's last year with Saskatchewan Roughriders as a head coach, I finished the football season there. And then Joe Farragelli was the new head coach. Again, changes. I was cut. So I was cut a number of times. And, it just sets you on your way to go forward. And so my wife and I decided, okay, we're married at this time. We came back to Calgary, settled in, and started a coaching career.
And so when was it that you knew you wanted to get into coaching? Was it during the time that you were down south again and coaching at a high school team and you said, maybe I'll do this when I'm done playing? Or what was it that really got you back into the game in that position?
Well, when I was in ninth grade, there's two things that I wanted. I wanted to be a professional football player for 10 years. Didn't happen, but was out of my control. I did the best that I could. And I also knew that I wanted to be a coach. And so my degree down at North Carolina State was in education. I have a education degree. I can teach phys ed, math, science, and any of the vocational fields. I used it for a year because when I finished with Saskatchewan, and I said to my wife, "That's enough. Let's start our family. Let's start our lives outside of playing football." And then I just started coaching right away. And so it was a quick jump. I had a year high school, 3 years at University of Calgary, 9 with the Stampeders, 11 with the Eskimos. Back to the Stampeders for 3. Then had 6 years as director of officiating, and then I went to the Montreal Alouettes. So that's so that way I don't have to tell you anymore, but we can talk about whatever questions you might have along that journey.
Yeah, no worries. And so the first coaching stop was at the University of Calgary. You were part of a Vanier Cup team. Was it, I believe, 1985? No,
this was 1982 was the very first time. It was with Peter Cannellan. And, we talked just prior to this. So in 1982, we won a Vanier Cup. We played against we played against Queen's University at Varsity Stadium. Great environment in which to play. But the 1983 team was better than the 82 team, but couldn't make it. We lost the University of Guelph on a sloppy field at Guelph. And so it's funny how you remember these things. My wife is always, how do you remember those things? It's almost like a car crash. You can remember something that's that impactful that all of a sudden it just stays with you. That all of a sudden that's, one of those things. The best teams don't always win. It's like on any given day, any team can win. You got to be prepared. You got to be ready to go. So we jumped at the University of Calgary. So what happened was, after 3 years with the Dinos, Steve Barato became the head coach of the Calgary Stampeders, and he was the offensive line coach when I was playing for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And so he all of a sudden knew, and this is also something that happened to myself, that as I was coaching, you realize there's a lot of other players that could possibly be very good coaches if they wanted to come into the profession. I would tell you, and anybody who's listening, coaching professionally is the best profession in the world, but it's also the worst. We have the highest divorce rate of any occupation because of the instability of being a coach. And so you have to have, it's a joke, and my wife says not to use humor because you're not funny, but what a head coach needs is he needs a loving wife, a loyal dog, and a great quarterback, but not necessarily in that order. But, and so that's where successes come, because every head coach that you have down in the NFL or in the CFL, what that head coach probably has is a great quarterback if they've had some long-term success. So my success down with the Edmonton Eskimos was I had the opportunity to bring Ricky Ray into the league, but Ricky Ray allowed me the opportunity to win a Grey Cup in 2003 with the Edmonton Eskimos.
And you guys during that time were continuing to foster the rivalry against the Montreal Alouettes in those back-to-back years. And it's crazy how the cycle of the league works with you ending up in Montreal years later. So what was it about the teams between 2002 and 2003 that finally got you guys over the hump to win it all?
The loss, we had a home Grey Cup in 2002. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing greater than being in the Grey Cup in your own city. And so we played the Montreal Alouettes. And we beat them in every statistical category except the only one that counts. And so it happens. It was a growing experience, a learning experience for us. And the football gods allowed the same thing to happen again, that Montreal finished in first and we're going to play in the Grey Cup. We finished in first and we played them in 2003 in Regina. And before the game, Greg Marshall and Danny Machocha were standing next to each other. This is pregame. And I happened to just come on by, and I think Greg Marshall said to Danny Machocha, where's a bookie? And I heard, where's a bookie? And I had to come on over and just ask him, why are you looking for a bookie? He says, I want to bet on this game. The preparation that occurred and the players, the warm-up, they had such a great feeling that this is going to be a one-sided game, which it was. And again, this is where Ricky Ray all of a sudden showed that he's going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback because they couldn't stop us. It was just destiny. It was just meant to happen.
You guys were in a close game in 2002, and then finally it became the one-sided. Everything came together, and you guys finally won it all. And so usually when you see coaches, especially during that era, Don Matthews was the coach of Montreal. I believe it was the year before in 2002. And I remember watching the tape of that game and you know, they take the onside kick back to the house at the end and score a touchdown and you know, they're celebrating and you see the coach is like very stoic and just kind of like a Bill Belichick, like, okay, you know, like we won, hooray. So what, like within the profession of coaching, within your philosophy, how do you take the wins and the losses, and when do you find the opportunity appropriate to show relief, or how do you approach big games like the Grey Cup or the playoffs in the CFL?
Very good question. Here's the coach speaking to a player. Don't let the highs be too high and the lows be too low. And somewhere in there is where you should operate, because again, it's also life. And I'd like to think that the one reason that I would like so many people to have the opportunity to experience playing football is it's one of the greatest sports that teaches life skills, because you're only one member of a team of 40 or 45 or 50. And the success comes from everyone doing what they need to do in order to have team success, because that's how it all operates together so fluidly. And when you win, when you score first, let's go back to even just scoring a touchdown. When you score a touchdown, don't beat your chest. It's not all about you. Celebrate with your teammates. There's 11 other guys that allowed you to get into the end zone. The same thing. So that's the whole mindset and the thought of the coaching that I would always try to instill in our coaching staff as well as our players, that, you know what? You don't want somebody to stand over top of you and pounding their chest. Be a professional. Pretend like you've been there before. And so that's what we did. What you'd like to do is say, after a football game, how proud I am of the players. They put it out on the line. My pregame warm-up speeches, TSN got so bored that they didn't want to bother recording them anymore, because it was really simple. I mean, the motivation comes from the players themselves. It can't come from the head coach to think that something that they say in the locker room is going to motivate them for 3 hours of time. How do you motivate a player? Have motivated players, and they motivate themselves. But the whole thing is, for me, is if you go out and play to the best of your ability, and if we have 44 players or 46 players, whatever the roster size is, everybody has a role to play. If you all play to the best of your abilities, that's when I'll shake your hand, look you in the eye, and I don't care what the scoreboard said. If we play to the best of our abilities, we won. Now, that's not going to necessarily keep my job, but my record proves that I have a lot more wins than losses. And so for me, that's a philosophy that I learned even down in high school, but also in university. And so now it comes full circle. If anybody were to want to be a coach, my suggestion to them is just be yourself. It's too hard to be somebody else. And so, you learn from other coaches and you're thinking, oh, that worked. Well, but is that you? If that's truly what you are, then you have a chance of being successful. Because a coach will impact more people in a season than most people, any teacher will in a lifetime, or people will in lifetimes. And so, to me, I am the person who I am because of the coaches that I've had the opportunity to be coached by and then actually coach with.
And you guys, and it really shows, like with the teams that you were a part of and the success that they had from keeping your cool, being a professional, and really knowing that it's all about the team. And that's what really elevates football clubs, especially in the CFL and football in general. It's the most team-oriented game in the entire world. If one person screws up, then it can be disastrous, and it can provide, failure, or can provide success. And everyone being on the same page allows for success to happen. Whereas when you watch other sports, you can see one person completely change the face of a team. And obviously you guys had Ricky Ray, who future Hall of Fame quarterback, but it wasn't just all in him. And there were so many other players. And even in the 2002, right, you look at the plays made at the end of the game to bring it back to be that close, or in the West Final, the plays that were made to seal the deal, because like you said, it's not always that the best team wins the game. And so you need those players to make plays. And so during your time in Calgary before you were in Edmonton, what was it in that tenure that really prepared you for leading the Edmonton Eskimos once you finally made the move up north to Alberta? Because you were there and you were working with Wally and had not been in the position that you knew you could be in to fully blossom.
That's if you allow the opportunity to know that every season gives you an opportunity again to learn things. And the toughest thing is to have gone up to Edmonton because of the rivalry. Our three children were young at the time. I have two daughters and a son. The son is the youngest. And when we told them that we were going to Edmonton, he goes, "Dad, we can't go to Edmonton. We hate Edmonton." And we just said, well, not anymore. And so going on up allowed me the opportunity to do something that was a little bit different, because Hugh Campbell hired me, and I went up as the assistant GM. So now I'm recruiting, I am contracts, I'm doing all of those things. And I went from assistant GM to GM. And then Don Matthews was the head coach that we ended up letting go. I think there were some health reasons. There's a whole bunch of things that happened. And Hugh Campbell and I are looking, and we let him go in training camp. And we looked at one another, and Hugh Campbell said to me, "I've already coached, it's your turn." And so that's how I actually got introduced as being the first time head coach. I always thought, my family was going to be there. People were going to be happy, be balloons and whatnot. The press conference, I'm sitting there, the players are crying, the media is sad. And, Hugh Campbell said that, Don Matthews no longer here. Whatever he said. Oh, and by the way, this is our new head coach. And that was it. And I'm thinking, wow, that lacked fanfare, but that's just the way it was. And so by this time, I had a lot of experience being Wally Buono's assistant head coach. A lot of times I was helping with all of the little nuances that needed to be done. when I went to Edmonton, learned about being an assistant GM, which allowed me to be the general manager, take control, bring players in, do contracts. And then when the opportunity presented itself to go on the field, it was almost seamless because most people who are head coaches are going to smile at this. We do all this work to think that we're going to become a head coach. The moment that you become a head coach, you realize how ill prepared you are to be a head coach. That all of a sudden there's a learning curve. You know, you think you can do all these things and you're going, wow, wait a second. I think I'm going to be able to run the offense or defense, but no, you're pulled different ways. You know, you have to deal with this situation or that situation. You have to be careful. If you are going to be the play caller, you better have some people that are doing all the work for you, because it's difficult. I mean, we did that with Wally, and the first year, Wally had a double headset on, and he had it for the very first game. And I said, Wally, you have no idea what's going on your bench. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, we have some situations that you need to take care of. And he only wore the headset one time because he had to be free in order to be part of decision-making for special teams or for offense. Are they going to go for it? You know, make decisions. But if you have a double headset on, you're really focused on the game and then in the press box, and that's where your form of communication lies. So, you know, all of those things allowed itself that when we had the chance, the 4 years that I was GM and head coach with the Edmonton Eskimos, we finished in first 3 times, 2 Grey Cup appearances, finished in second once, and after 11 years, I was let go. And that's part of professional sports. That's just the way it was, the way it is. And so I was able to come down to Calgary, which was almost like a homecoming, as a GM and head coach. And we had success for the 3 years that I was the GM and head coach. When the interesting part, and I'm very proud of, when I left Edmonton and when I left Calgary, they won the Grey Cup the year after. And that's something I'm very proud of. Yes, the shelves were still full. You know what? There were good football teams. It was up and coming. And so for Danny Machocha, won a Grey Cup, and John Huffnagel won his first Grey Cup in his first year as the head coach. And that, again, interesting story is I played against John Huffnagel at Penn State. I played with John Huffnagel in Calgary Stampeders. I played with John Huffnagel with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and I helped him get his first job with the Calgary Stampeders. And so there's a connection. We're all connected somehow.
And I like that you mentioned that the 2 things at the end about when you left the team, that they won the Grey Cup the following year. So that would have been when Edmonton won the very famous, it's considered one of the greatest Grey Cups of all time, 2005. That was at BC Place, I believe
BC
it was.
Place, that's correct.
Overtime game against the Alouettes.
That's right.
And then 2008 against the Montreal Alouettes at Olympic Stadium would have been John Huffnagel's first Grey Cup title.
That's correct. As the GM and head coach.
As a GM and head coach, yeah.
That's right.
And I remember when I was the last episode, we were chatting with Nick Lewis, and he was talking about the grinds that it took to win that game. And one of the things he mentioned that I'm sure you can attest to as a coach is, he said, when you're in the playoffs, things are magnified. Like everything just zooms in so much on you. And then when you're in the Grey Cup, things are even more magnified. And the risk factor and the magnitude of failure, if things go wrong, is too great for coaches to do anything crazy and outlandish. So in terms of that game in 2008, yeah, watching as a kid, it seemed kind of objectively not as exciting as, let's say, the 2005 one, because there was only 2 touchdowns, but it was a great defensive battle, and it was an amazing chess match that eventually fell into Calgary's favor from their defense holding it down. And so when you watch that game the year after your departure, what was it you saw in that team that you saw that said, okay, this is how they need to do it for it to all come together?
John did a really nice job. They made some changes in the coaching staff, and there's only a few changes. And you take great pride in knowing that, you know what, you're part of that success that was there. Now, I watched that game so differently because after that, I was now director of officiating for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was more interested in the third team on the field than the Stampeders and who they're playing, because the third team on the field were 7 officials that I'm responsible for. And so the real famous game that the officials had a play in was in Calgary, when Saskatchewan is playing the Montreal Alouettes, and Glenn Johnson goes like this. It's on top of the head and goes 13 men. There's a whole nother story to that, but I was thinking right then and there, if we made a mistake, I would just pack up because I'd be fired. And people are going, well, how could it be so difficult to count to 12? Well, you got so many players running in, running out, that it's not as easy as you think. And we have 3 officials that are responsible for counting the number. And the moment that TSN started to count, and I was up in the press box, the officials in the press box also have a little space so that they can communicate with the command center, is also down on the field, and that if we need to do something, we can talk to the referee that's on the field. And I happen to be looking at the TV screen on the side, and they're counting. They're putting the little numbers on. And they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They got to 12, and then there was a pause. But then they went into the end zone and said 13. I thought, phew, I saved my job for another year. And so, yeah, that was interesting, because usually they don't hire football coaches to go into officiating. Usually they hire people who are in the officiating department who've been referees, usually jump in. But it was a great 6 years at that time. But yeah, watching the game, Grey Cup, all of a sudden you're looking at it with a much different lens. And so I really learned to appreciate the 3 teams on the field. A lot of times people just want to boo the officials, but they go out, they make less mistakes than the players do and the coaches do, but yet they're held to a higher standard. The moment that they make one mistake, they're a bum. And you're just thinking, wow, you know, they don't have replay. They only get to see it one time, and their eyes have to be right. And if they can't make a decision whether it is or isn't, don't throw a flag. And that's where some people, you know, get a little bit upset, because if you're not 100% sure, you can't do it.
100%. And that's a great transition to the next question, is being a part of being the director of officiating and being a part of the Department of Officials with the CFL. How did the opportunity come up for you, and what was your perspective initially on being involved with officiating in comparison to having been an executive and worked with teams as a coach and as an assistant GM, and now you're on neutral ground?
Well, it was rather interesting to get a call. I think the work that I was able to do on the field, I really do believe that the commissioner felt he's somebody that knows football, that he's respected. Why shouldn't we bring him in? That was an interesting call on his behalf. And to think that I had an ego that I could think that I could possibly do it, I was in the same boat as being a head coach for the first time. What I brought to officiating was football. What they brought to me is they helped me learn the intricacies of officiating. And so one of the examples I'd like to share with all the listeners so that they truly understand how difficult it is, because if a speed limit is 60 kilometers an hour, are you speeding at 61? The answer is yes, you're speeding. Are you going to get a ticket? No. Where do you think you can go? Some people might say 69, you know, and would a police officer stop somebody? 70, 71? If you go 74, that's definitely a ticket if I'm in a foul mood. But you are definitely speeding. That's officiating. We're in a gray area. So what happens is, if coaches know that they can coach to 69, what they do is they start pushing it to 70, 71, and that's where it's so gray. It's not black and white. There is no such thing as black and white. If officials officiated to the rule book, I wouldn't watch the CFL. I wouldn't watch the NFL, because there could be a flag thrown a lot more. People say every play, but it could be thrown a lot more. So there's so much gray area in officiating. It's not necessarily black and white, and we can't make it perfect. Another thing I'm very proud of is I put the command center together during my 6 years there. I went down to the NFL. They were doing it before. The NFL command center was actually for security reasons. It was after 9/11, and they wanted to have security cameras all over, and they realized that it's actually an officiating tool. So I went down one Thursday night. They had only one football game, because that's all we would ever have, one game at a time, that we could then have just one crew. Because their command center, they had a whole bunch of different stations. I think they had over 10 stations set up, and one huge, huge giant screen. So that way, every game that's being played at 11 o'clock or at 1 o'clock, they have somebody that's in the command center that if something was needed, that's how it operates. So that, again, if there was a big takeaway for me was the command center. And then we all of a sudden witnessed something that the New Orleans Saints missed out on, an opportunity to go to a Super Bowl. We wouldn't have made that mistake. We could have corrected that mistake. And so for that, there's a lot of things that the CFL does very well, or better than the NFL. And there is a great relationship between the NFL and the CFL, because there's a lot of things that are shared. And a lot of people don't know that. But the NFL truly appreciates having the Canadian Football League operate and run as efficiently as it does.
And you mentioned the pride of bringing together the command center. And now I know that I can't remember which specific year. I think it was either 2016 or 17 when Randy Ambrosie was first the commissioner, and when they had the rule for challenge flags. And I know that fans they love to complain, of course. I've officiated soccer for 10 years, officiated basketball for 6 years, and football is no different in terms of the standard of officiating. If you make one mistake, everyone hates you. The expectation is you're 100% right all the time, and not for the players. And I think it was you that told me this, actually, at the University of Calgary when we were in training camp. I was asking you about your experience with working with as director of officiating, and I was asking you about, how do you receive criticism as an official? And you said, well, you turn to the coach if they ever complain to you, or turn to a player and say, did you guys ever screw up during this game? Did you ever make any mistakes? If you did, are you held to the same, or should you be held to the same standard? If we make mistakes and you guys make mistakes, then we're no different, right? We're as human as you are, and that we're doing our best to do our job 100%, and so are you guys. But if you can't expect yourself to never make mistakes, then you can't expect the same of us. I believe it was you that told me that story.
It would be very close, because I might have told you the story about me talking to Wally Buono, director of officiating. He's GM, head coach of the BC Lions. Now, you know that we have a relationship. Mm-hmm. And Wally was so upset with one of our officials. He made 2 mistakes in a game. Now, the reason that I wasn't upset with him is the official knew afterwards that he made mistakes. And so Wally said, you know what? You got to get rid of him. You know what? He's terrible. He's this and that. And I'm going, Wally, he acknowledged his mistakes, but just for the sake of giving you some more information, I'll get rid of him tomorrow. Who would you like for me to put in his place? Oh, we need to work with our officials, and they're graded. The ones that get graded the best get to do playoff games, and the best of the best get to do the Grey Cup. And so there's a lot of pride on the line. Those guys are very, very competent, talented, and they know the rule books a lot better than the coaches. And a lot of times I tried to coach the coaches in the 6 years I was there. I said, if you're going to yell at the official, know who is responsible for making the call. A lot of times the poor sideline official that's doing the line of scrimmage gets an earful by the head coach or other coaches, and you're just thinking, you know what? They shouldn't. You don't do that. And, but know who has what responsibilities on the field. And so I actually tried to coach the coaches so that they knew. When I started to coach the coaches, and then now all of a sudden well, where are the blind spots? I said, there's lots of them, but we know where they are. We're not going to tell you where they are. We try to make sure we can cover, because we have 7 officials for 24 players. But the 7 officials that we have are responsible for 12 offensive players, because the defensive players will engage the offensive players. That's how we get to actually see. So you still have to have a wide lens, but still be able to focus on it. And so to me, that is the ultimate challenge. And again, that's part of the third team on the field.
During when was the last year you were director of officiating? Was 2014?
2014. That's correct.
So you were still director of officiating during the season and through to the Grey Cup, correct?
That's correct. That's right.
So if I'm going to, I guess, shoot in the dark here at a game, I think or a specific moment, I think you already am anticipating I'm going to bring up is for the sake of Hamilton Tiger Cat fans, it's unfortunate that they lost the Grey Cup this last year for them and lost the Grey Cup in 2014 in BC. We go back to the play that Brandon Banks takes back for a touchdown with the last minute of the game. I still have debates with my friends about the block in the back that Andre Prue had called, or I guess he had announced the call. He may not have been the one that threw the flag.
Correct. That's right.
And so the debate that we have, the contention is, was the player in a position to impact the returner? Was he in a position? Was what he was doing impacting the fact that he took it back to the house? Because many people were saying afterwards, after watching the replay on television, he wasn't even a part of the play anyways. It didn't impact him. Why would they throw? Like, people were saying, well, why would he throw the flag? It doesn't even matter. But when I'd spoke with Nick Lewis, he had said that they had game planned on punt return. They knew that Hamilton had done that before. They'd watched it on film. So as director of officiating, you're on neutral ground. How do you see that play, and what was it that knew you guys had the right call with throwing the flag for block in the back?
The official would have been downgraded for not actually making the call. And again, most people know all the referees. Jake Ireland was a name that's been around for a long time. He's been hated everywhere. But he's the one who makes the announcements on the plays. All the 6 other officials tell him what it is, and then he gets to make the announcement, and everybody boos the referee. Here's one of the things, again, that's really difficult when we talk to coaches about having officials make those kinds of decisions, that it didn't affect the outcome of the play. Why should you throw your flag? When it is flagrant and done, we still can't make that decision. It has to be called. And it was one of those, it's a shame, it just had to be called. I had one experience where I was with my son-in-law, and he wasn't my son-in-law at the time, but I was in Calgary in the press box. He wanted to know what I did as director of officiating. And it was the Hamilton Tiger Cats playing the Calgary Stampeders. And the president of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, after the game was over, my son-in-law was blown away, because the language that was thrown at me was not something I think that he'd be very happy about if they ever got replayed. That how the heck, and it wasn't heck, it was a lot firmer. I think the penalties were 14 for Hamilton and only 4 for Calgary. And he was furious over that. He says, they got to be even. They can't be that lopsided. And the vulgarity just continued, and he thought it was going to come to blows. And again, now I think you know me well enough. don't let the highs be too high and the lows be too low. He's not going to get me excited. I'm listening, being polite, and just saying, the officials don't count the number of penalties. It's not until the very end might they count them on up and go, wow, there was a lot more penalties for this team than that team. Be a little more disciplined. And, it happens. And so it was my son-in-law, future son-in-law at the time, was going to ask me for my daughter's hand in marriage and didn't, because he didn't think that it was the appropriate time to do so. So I just ended up taking him back home. And a week or two later, he came back to the house to ask my daughter's hand in marriage. But it was a really interesting story where it segued that, officials do a great job in all areas. And one of the fallacies that we have is that we are too hard on officials. There's a lot of young kids that might be wanting to get into officiating, but they get booed or talked down to too often. One of the greatest things that we can do is we're always trying to say for university football players to give back to football. And one of the things that they never think about is a university player would have an advantage to getting officiating, and it would be easy to work him up the ranks of to possibly get on a CFL field, because there's only a very few CFL officials that have played university football. Most all the officials played high school football and learned and the nuances. And so that's a plug for anybody who's listening, that it's a great way to stay involved. And you're not spending as many hours as you would as a coach or, the players do, but it's desperately needed because that is the third team that's on the field.
And it's interesting that you mentioned with that play in the Grey Cup for Hamilton, that official would have been downgraded for not calling that. And that's, again, I know that in the NFL, they brought in replay after the PI that wasn't called against the Saints, but then they never ended up calling it anyways, or I think they only called it once during the whole season. And then they vetoed it and got rid of it. And I find it to be such a tough spot for fans to truly understand without stopping and really learning and knowing what it is that officials, like how they make calls and what it is that is their responsibility, because it looks so black and white on TV, and every couch quarterback and GM can point the finger and say, hey, that was a great call, that was a bad call. And not often do I ever hear, wow, the officials called a great game. They just don't say anything. And I know, especially in the CFL, there's a small number of officials. You hear, oh, so-and-so is going to be officiating the Grey Cup or is officiating this game. And, here we go. They favor this team or that team, or all the speculations. And I remember some of my friends saying that about the Grey Cup this year. And then we never talked about the officials. The game was well officiated and there was nothing that went wrong. And as a person who has officiated sports for many years now, I have a great appreciation for those who are involved with it, because that you are held to the high standard, but it is very, very uncommon that fans especially will ever tell you, hey, that was a great game. If you had a great game, they won't say anything to you. That's how you know. If you're in the background and nobody knows that you were there, that's the goal that we're told in soccer. And so you went from there then to the Montreal Alouettes after that season in 2014. And tell us a little bit about how that transition was created, and what was it that went into getting the call from the Alouettes, and what made you say, hey, I want to get back into coaching for this year?
Well, there obviously, when the Montreal Alouettes beat Saskatchewan in Calgary, Bob Wettenhall came in, and I'm in my jacket and tie. I knew I was director of officiating. Came on in and said how lucky we were. And I happened to say to Bob, you created the error. That was one of the greatest comebacks in football, regardless of, you forced them to not have a timeout. You forced them to have 13 men on the field. You then had the opportunity to kick it. You deserve the victory. So, I knew and obviously with the many years that I've been, Bob Wettenhall is the owner of the Montreal Alouettes. So after I was obviously fired from director of officiating, illness and fatigue, they got sick and tired of me. And it happens. And I know why. Actually, because I was too honest. One of the owners didn't like that. He thought I was throwing officials under the bus. And I said, no, I never threw anybody under the bus. But if we were wrong, we're wrong. And I'm going to admit it. And I said, I'm going to take responsibility. And I don't want you to take it the wrong way. But know that when I take the responsibility, the person usually will man up, whoever the official might be. And so I had the opportunity to know Bob Wettenhall. And so when I was a free agent on the field, I got a call from Bob Wettenhall, and he wanted me to be the head coach. The general manager was Jim Popp. Now, the reason that Jim Popp wasn't part of the selection committee, Jim Popp wanted to be the head coach and the GM. And so it started that way. And so Bob Wettenhall and I made an agreement. I was able to pick a couple of people. It was a later call, so there was people on staff. I was able to hire 2 people, and I did. But it was not a match made in heaven. It took Jim Popp a couple of weeks, maybe even months, before he ever called me. And so that's not a good sign. The GM and head coach have to be, side by side, one together. But this was again, you're going to have a feeling, hopefully, for understanding exactly what happened. So I had a single year contract, and again, just because whatever usually you get a 3-year contract, but that's all he was offering. I took it, and we started the football season 1-7, and everybody's calling for my head, and you know what? By this time, it really didn't matter, because I've been hired and fired, and I've been cut as a professional a number of times. And we're 1-7, so don't let the highs be too high and the lows be too low. We turned it around. It's the biggest turnaround in CFL history at that time. We finished 9-9. Because there was a point in time where all of a sudden we got over the hump and we believed in ourselves. We just said, you know what? Hey, we believe in one another. That 1-7, everybody, that's a long period of time to go without having success. And they could have given up on each other, but they didn't. And so we finished 9-9, finished in second, played the BC Lions. They were a crossover team. We beat them. We went in, played the Hamilton Tiger Cats. We had a chance of beating them. We didn't. We had a couple of injuries. And so then I'm back the next year. I get another year contract. And so I'm back, and we're struggling. We don't have a quarterback. Like I said before, we had 3 quarterbacks that had CFL experience. One started on the 6-game injured list. The other one got hurt in the very first half of the first game. And then our third quarterback that had CFL experience got hurt in the third quarter of the first game. So we don't have a quarterback. So we're now doing this without a quarterback. We're doing smoke and mirrors, and we are 2-4 going into BC. We beat BC. I got a Gatorade shower, and 24 hours later, I was fired, and they put Jim Popp in. So I didn't have a chance to. So I want you to know, and I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, but I celebrated the fact that I did something that a lot of people probably have never done in their lifetime. I was cut or fired double digits. That call from Bob Wettenhall saying that Jim Popp was going to take over and the press release will go out in 30 minutes. That's exactly what he told me. I was on the team bus in Montreal, and the next day we were having a team meeting. The team was on the bus, but it wasn't my position to tell anybody. I said, we'll see everybody tomorrow, 9 o'clock. My biggest challenge was getting a hold of my wife and now getting a hold of our 3 grown children, because within 30 minutes, social media will have this, and then I don't want them to hear it over social media. So that ended up being my 10th rejection. But when you're rejected, it's only an opportunity to continue to go forward. So I got fired early, and so Wayne Harris called, and he said, would you like to come and help us out? I said, absolutely. This is Wayne's first year, and I got to be his eyes and ears, just watched and talked to him before practice, after practice, and he's done a great job, and he's had great success with the Dinos, and it was nice to be just a small part of it. And like we talked about, is now have the opportunity to go back and be with the green and gold. I was with the Eskimos. It's going to be hard to not say Edmonton Eskimos, but I was with the Eskimos for 11 years. Now I'm green and gold with the University of Alberta Golden Bears, with two players that we won a Grey Cup together. The offensive coordinator is Ricky Walters, and the head coach is Chris Morris, who is my starting offensive tackle that we had success with. And so, I look forward to that part of the journey. So hopefully what anyone gets out of our discussion was the fact that, this crazy guy doesn't have any hair, but seems to be an upbeat guy that just must love the sport. And I do. And people have always asked me, are you retired, or are you going to retire? I said, I can never retire because I've never worked a day in my life. I've done what I love to do. And so for that, I'm forever grateful. And to be able to tell the stories and share them with you made my day. I got my lift in, my cardio in, and now I had the opportunity to talk football. It was a great day.
Absolutely. And Tom, thank you so much for your time today. I was going to wrap up with one more question here for you, and so many great stories and things we could go on for hours, I'm sure. And the circle of life has been something that you've been a part of within the world of football many times, with the ups and the downs, and Edmonton, Calgary, being in Montreal, and being a part of the officiating for a big game for Montreal, and the close relationships and friendships you've developed, and the people you've met. There's so much. And if there's one question that I want to finish with, is this: what is it about failure and success in football that makes you want to keep coming back? You talk about head coaching is the best and the worst job in the world. What is it about this success and failure within the world of coaching that has always made you want to just keep coming back to football, knowing that something bad may happen and something good may happen? Why do you keep coming back?
There's an adrenaline rush that you can get as a coach, that you can't play the game forever, particularly football. It's, when I stand on the sideline and just watch even university ball, I'm just going, ooh, the speed and the physicality of it. And there's an adrenaline rush to putting young men together, putting a game plan, teaching technique, seeing them have success, keeps you young. I can't imagine me doing anything else. I think this will be the last thing that I'll ever be doing is football, and being involved in it. So when football got taken away, I just started a Canadian Football Academy where we did combines, and we did summer camps, and we did clinics, and we did anything that we could to continue to keep the ball rolling, because you see such, even having a 2-week summer camp, from the first day that they come to the last to see improvement, and to see that we can actually teach them a couple of life skills as well along the way, that, you're going to get knocked down, get up. You're determined by your ability. You never fail until you stop trying. And people look funny. And so what we do at the very end of practice is I put them up in the stands where the parents are, so the parents can hear what we're talking to the young athletes about. And so it's a rush. that I'm an adrenaline junkie, have been for many years. Um, I got it through playing. I wrestled. I was track and field in high school. I wrestled in university as well. I just loved the competition. I love the fact that, each and every one of us on football have individual battles. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. That's just the part of it. But you might have 60 opportunities, because 60 different snaps on offense or on defense or on the special teams, you get an opportunity. And know that, hey, success and failure is going to be based on, how well we do everything together. So I like to think that that's it, and that having the opportunity to still influence people, young, up and coming, because this is our society today. And what you learn on the field of athletics, but particularly on the field of football, I think that we're going to put ourselves in a better situation tomorrow than we were yesterday. And, that's what drives me. That's what gets me excited each and every day. And that's what got me excited today, that I had the opportunity to spend some time with you and to share some of the things that I have learned throughout my career.
Well, Tom, wiser words couldn't have been spoken. Thank you so much for having joined us. And it's a great opportunity to talk about football, and it's an amazing team game. And I'm so glad that you're able to have time today to join us and to share about your experiences and lessons and everything that you've been through with the great game, and will continue to go through as the years go on as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. I enjoyed it.
Well, everybody, thank you again for listening and huddling up to our episode today, number 12, with Tom Higgins, former head coach in the CFL, University of Alberta defensive coordinator, as well as former CFL player.